Welcome, I'm John Caldera, president of the Independence Institute and your devil's advocate. A little later, we're going to be talking about government taking over private businesses and running them. But first, I know what concerns you. It's Ireland. So I thought we'd have this discussion. Jim Lyons, one of the more famed lawyers in town. Jim, good to have you here.
Thanks, John. Nice to be here.
Now, for what, 8 years, Ireland was a special, how would you put it, project of yours that
Yes.
Bill Clinton asked you to be an envoy to and to help out in basically peace negotiations. Would that be the best way to put that?
Yes and no. Mostly my focus was on economic development and reconciliation in support of the peace process. The negotiations themselves were led by Senator Mitchell, Senator George Mitchell.
Now, you did this for years. You put together a book, Peace in the Streets, and I want to kind of go through this because this is a great story. And
Thank you.
And unlike a lawyer, you must have had a human being actually write this. This can actually be read by somebody like me. Why were the Clintons more interested in Ireland and the conflict there compared to their predecessors? I mean, this has been a conflict that's been going on, for decades in Northern Ireland. Why did he call upon you to go there?
Well, let me answer the first question. His interest was personal. He had spent time there when he was a student at Oxford and was intrigued by your very question. So what's the problem here? And how does this happen, that there still are troops in the streets in the 1960s and 70s, and only troops in the streets in this part of Western Europe?
Make clear, British troops.
British troops in Northern Ireland.
In Northern Ireland,
right.
Which is part of
the United Kingdom.
Would you call it a colony, or would you call it
I'd call
province?
it a province. It's a province. Secondly, there's political interests, of course. There are, at some estimates, close to 45 million Americans of Irish descent who have varying levels of interest in this issue. Some of the Irish-American groups during the '92 campaign had asked then Governor Clinton if he were elected to appoint a peace envoy to Northern Ireland, which he agreed to do. That ultimately became Senator Mitchell. And there was an economic interest. Ireland at the time was about a $2 billion trading partner with the United States. So that dysfunction in Northern Ireland affected that trading relationship.
One of the things you do really well in the book is to give us a brief history. I didn't know much of that until you did, but out of the island of Ireland, a revolution in the early part of the century really gave independence to most of Ireland. It was that little piece of 6 provinces of Northern Ireland, and why didn't the revolution take there? What was the compromise that made that stay part of the empire?
Well, that was the compromise. The British government, then led, by the way, in the negotiations by a young rising junior minister called Winston Churchill, did not feel that they could leave those who wanted to stay in the United Kingdom in an independent Ireland against their will. So the compromise was to create this province, or as some call it, a statelet, of 6 counties with a predominantly Protestant population that wanted to retain their relationship with the United Kingdom. Now, that led to civil war in the South, because there were those who said that deal should be rejected. We should take it all 32 counties. And when that civil war ended, things settled down. The 26 counties of the Republic became a free state, and then after World War II, Ireland became an independent republic, which it is now.
When you got on the ground there, what was it, 1993?
Yes.
What was the first impression you had, and what is it that you realized needed to get done?
Well, first of all, I thought this can't be that difficult a problem. These people all speak the same language. They all worship the same God in essentially the same way. Nobody has to give up any real estate to make a peace, like in the Middle East. So what's the problem here? Sort of the typical American impatience. The answer was you had to understand, and it took a long time to understand, at least 300 years worth of suspicion, sectarian violence, and outright hatred between the two communities.
What was the first thing you did? I mean, because what you were able to accomplish in those 8 years was pretty dramatic. What steps were first, and what sticks out in your mind as the turning point?
Well, the first steps for those of us, and I was privileged to be part of a team that included George Mitchell and the Clintons themselves, was to make sure both communities, both at the leadership level and at the grassroots level, would be able to trust us. We had to reassure them that we were not here to force some sort of a solution. We were here to try and create enough space for both sides to reach their own solution. I said early on, we're not here for a united Ireland. We're here for an agreed Ireland, and it's your agreement to make, not ours. If we can help facilitate that, that's why we're here.
Why would they facilitate you? Why would they reach out and accept you? I mean, when you think about it, you've got hundreds of years of fighting between Catholic and Protestant, to simplify it. And so some bunch of Americans come over and say, hey, we can help, trust us.
Well, we were asked to come. Both the British and Irish governments asked us. After President Clinton took office, having made the promise during the campaign to appoint a peace envoy to Northern Ireland, which, by the way, was somewhat controversial, both the new British government, Tony Blair's government, and the new Irish government, Prime Minister Reynolds, asked the Clinton administration, can you help mediate this dispute? And, by the way, can you help with some economic development that would ensure peace and bring to both sides some benefit from making peace?
Tell me a little bit about, you met some incredible people, and the book really gives a few of those stories. I want to talk about a disappearing son and explain this lady and how this came to be, because this is a compelling story. Who is this lady?
Her name is Margaret McKinney. She's from West Belfast. When I first met her, she was in her late 50s, early 60s. Her son Brian had been taken by the IRA some almost 15 years before and never heard from again. He was a young teenager, probably mentally challenged, who had gotten his first job as a janitor in a small shop. Was very proud of that. Now had some dignity and now had a small paycheck. Some friends put him up to what he thought was a prank, to do a holdup of the shop, gave him a toy gun to do it. He came home and told his parents about the stunt, and they were horrified. They marched him back to the store. They gave the money back. They apologized to the storekeeper, who understood. But that night, the IRA, three of them in disguise, came and took Brian from his home at gunpoint, saying he needed to be taught a lesson. They'd bring him back in a few days. He was never seen or heard from again. So his parents lived in just agony, and they weren't the only ones. Right. I mean, there are dozens have disappeared. Some still disappeared in Northern Ireland. Mrs. McKinney came to my attention when she and a group of women from both sides came to Washington to meet with the White House and talk about what their organization was doing. And while we were waiting for the president, she pulled out all these yellowed clippings, as I described in the book, and went through this story with me. And I was obviously affected and moved by it. So when we finished our meeting, I asked the Clintons if I could help her. Would they mind if I helped her? And they said, no, absolutely not. So we started a campaign, and it wasn't just me, it was the White House and the president as well, to the IRA's political wing, Sinn Féin, then led, as it is now, by Jerry Kelly. By Jerry Adams. Jerry Kelly is also one of the leaders, saying, you have to help us find this young man. Well, you know, the time has passed, we don't know what happened, and we always said, work at it. And ultimately they did. And he was found after about 20 years, buried across the border. His remains returned to his mother and father so he could be buried and they could have some peace.
It's hard to imagine that type of, would you call it terrorism? I mean, we see what's going on in other parts of the world. People are taken, they disappear, and they're gone. You don't think of it in Ireland. You don't think of it in English-speaking countries. It's hard for me as an American to think of that just happening in what is mostly a peaceful place.
Well, it is hard, John. I mean, it's very hard. You have to understand that this culture has developed over a period of centuries. the distrust, the hatred, the sectarianism, and maybe the closest thing we have in this country is racism. But even that is a poor analog to this, because you're exactly right. I mean, this is as horrific as what happened to that young Jordanian pilot. I mean, it's incomprehensible to us. But what we wanted to do is see if we could help her and get her some peace.
And you did.
Some end to her agony, anyway.
You've also, tell me a little bit about the bombing in that.
In Omaha?
Yeah.
Well, a few months after the Good Friday Agreement, which was ratified by both the people in the North and the South with an overwhelming vote, there was a bomb set off in a little market town called Omaha, which is in the central part of Northern Ireland. It's a mixed community. Catholics and Protestants have lived there side by side for a long time. And it was market day, Saturday, when people come in from the farms to buy and sell. The IRA called, or a splinter group of the IRA, as it turns out, called with their usual customary warning: we've got a bomb, we're going to set it off. Either by mistake or design, people left one end of downtown to the other to avoid the bomb, and that's where the bomb was. It went off and it killed 28 people, including a young woman pregnant with twins. Most of those people were identified by dental records. The president had scheduled a trip to Ireland the following month. So the question was, do we go now in view of this horrific tragedy? And there was some debate, and I was on the side that said, we do go to Ireland, and we do go to Omaha. You can't go and not go to Omaha. That was the president's view. He talked to Prime Minister Blair. Both of them wanted to meet with their families, so that's what I describe in the book. The president took just a few people, didn't take the staff and the senators and congressional people. He took me and George Mitchell and a few others, and we went to a community center, basically a gym. And there were families lined up all the way around the gym. And the Blair started on one side and the Clintons started on the other, consoling, talking to each family. And then, as I say in the book, we got to Claire Gallagher, who was 15 years old, beautiful young woman, except for the bandages on her eyes. She'd been blinded by this bomb. And she said to the Clintons and to Senator Mitchell, and I overheard what she said, that you know, she was ready to go to Scotland and study classical piano at a conservatory, and now, of course, she couldn't do that because she couldn't read music. And Senator Mitchell leaned in and took her hands and said, Beethoven wrote some of his best music when he was deaf. I have great respect for Senator Mitchell for that, and among other things. Fast forward about a year later, at the annual White House St. Patrick's Day event, which is a huge event, big tent out in the South Lawn. People come from both places in Northern Ireland, North and South. Phil Coulter, the pianist, was the entertainment. And I think Mary Chapin Carpenter was on the bill, and James Galway, the flautist. And about halfway through his set, he stopped and invited a young person to come up and join him, playing his piano, and it was Claire Gallagher.
Wow.
And it brought the place to its feet, as you might expect.
Incredible. All right, those stories and more, and what led up to those peace accords and the work you did, Peace in the Streets. I'm assuming Amazon is a good place to grab this.
Amazon or the Tattered Cover.
The two always places to get it.
Yes.
Jim, thank you. I really do appreciate it.
I appreciate it as well.
Stay tuned.